Your children are a gift from God, he whispered. But they must never know who I am. The words echoed in my head like a funeral bell, low and final. I stood there, my hands trembling, my breath caught somewhere between rage and heartbreak, as Pastor Leon Velasquez pulled his collar higher and turned away from me like I was some ghost from a past he never wanted to remember. I was holding a photo. Not just any photo, but the one where our youngest, Alba, had drawn him as Papa Leon in crayon. The curls were exaggerated, the smile crooked, but unmistakable. She saw him. She knew, deep in her little heart, even if we never spoke the truth. And now he was denying everything. I never promised you a family, he said, voice cold. You were special. But you misunderstood. That was the moment I knew. I had to tell the world. But not with screaming. With my truth. My name is Maria Estela Navarro, and I am 83 years old. I have soft blonde curls that I still wrap in pink rollers every Sunday night. My hands are veiny now, but strong. I live in a white stucco house in Zaragoza, Spain, a place full of old churches and older secrets. I retired as a nurse nearly 20 years ago, but my past? It's still pulsing like an open wound. I didn't always live in shadows. There was a time I believed in miracles, and I thought Leon was one. Let me take you back. It started 15 years ago, when I had just turned 68. Widowed. Lonely. Forgotten by my 3 adult sons who had all moved to Madrid with their wives who hated me. I wore long skirts and smelled of lavender and eucalyptus oil. I went to church because it was the only place I didn't feel invisible. That's where I saw him. Pastor Leon. Young. Maybe 40. Dark hair that curled at the ends. Sharp jawline. His sermons were like poems. He didn't just preach, he performed. And when he looked into the crowd, it felt like he was speaking to just one person. To me. At first, I dismissed it as foolishness. A silly crush, perhaps. But then he started talking to me after Mass. Always gentle. Always respectful. He said, Señora Navarro, you carry pain in your eyes. You've seen storms, haven't you? I blushed. At my age. He listened when I told him about my husband Enrique's death. He prayed over my arthritis-stricken knees. He brought me tea from Santiago and rosemary oil for my headaches. And one night, when I stayed late to clean the candles by the altar, he touched my hand. And I didn't pull away. You are not done, he said. God still has a purpose for your body. For your womb. I laughed then. Out loud. I remember it so clearly because it was the first real laugh in years. I'm almost 70, Pastor, I said. What womb? But he just smiled. A miracle can be born from ashes. That was how it began. A series of stolen kisses in the sacristy. Secret meetings in the back room of the church. And later, when I could no longer deny the fluttering in my stomach or the sickness in the mornings, I knew the impossible had happened. I was pregnant. With twins. It was medically baffling. The doctors warned me. My age. The risk. But Leon told me, this is God's way. You were chosen. He even arranged a private midwife in Barcelona, away from judgmental eyes. I gave birth in silence, in a room that smelled of lemon bleach and fear. 2 perfect girls. Alba and Carmen, both with his jet-black curls and my dimples. He came only once to see them. He wept. But he never came back. Said it was dangerous for his ministry. Said I had to lie. Say they were adopted. Say they are from your niece. Say anything. Just not the truth. And I did. 4 years. Until last week, when I caught Alba, now 12, Googling, who is my father? She had found old pictures. Sermons on YouTube. She circled his face on the screen. Mom, this man. Why do I look like him? I lied. Again. But I couldn't sleep that night. So I wrote a letter to Leon. Told him he needed to see them. That they deserved answers. He called me the next morning, breathing hard. No one must know, he said. Too late, I answered. She knows. That's what led to today. To that moment. To him standing in my garden under the bitter orange tree, saying they were never part of the plan. To him brushing past me. To me realizing he would never protect them. He would never acknowledge them. And worse, he had moved on. He had a new fiancée. A young one. She stood in his car, waiting, wearing white, smiling. He didn't look back as he left. But I did. I looked down at Alba's drawing still in my hand. And I made a decision. If Leon wouldn't give my daughters their name, I would give them the truth. Because a storm is coming. And he has no idea what's buried in my shoebox under the bed. A shoebox filled with letters. And pictures. And something else. Something that could destroy his whole ministry. Something I never meant to use. But maybe it's time. My fingers shook as I carried the shoebox to the kitchen table, setting it gently beside the steaming pot of lentil soup I no longer felt hungry for. The house was silent, except for the ticking wall clock and the faint hum of Alba's voice upstairs, singing softly as she did her homework. Innocent, unaware that her entire world was built on a lie. I opened the lid slowly, as if I were disturbing a ghost. Inside were a torn receipt from a hotel in Valencia, his handwriting scrawled on the back, Room 412. Come after Mass. Ultrasound prints from the day I found out I was pregnant. His initials were in the corner. He had accompanied me. A silver necklace with a small cross. He gave it to me on the night he whispered, I think God made you for me. And the final piece, perhaps the most damning. A letter. A real letter, written in his hand, dated 12 years ago. It read, Maria Estela. If anything happens to me, if I'm ever taken away or exposed, I want you to know that I did love you. I love the girls, even if I cannot be near them. I hope one day they'll understand that I kept them hidden not out of shame, but to protect them. The world wouldn't understand a pastor with a family. Yours in Christ, always, Leon. I had folded it and unfolded it so many times over the years that the creases had faded into cracks. I placed it on the table, staring at it, my heart pounding like I was the one being accused of something. I had no desire to ruin anyone. Not at first. But his betrayal today, it awakened something. That shoebox wasn't just a box of memories. It was a weapon now. I could feel it. And I hated that feeling. I had kept Leon's secret for years. I even defended him in my heart, saying, he's just afraid. The world can be cruel to men of the cloth. But that's not fear anymore. That's cowardice. That's convenience. And he left me to carry the shame, the burden. And now, he gets to move on? To smile beside a fresh-faced girl in a white dress while my daughters sit in their bedroom wondering why no one shares their last name? I stood and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the bitter orange tree rustled in the evening breeze. That's where Leon had stood earlier. That's where he told me, coldly, that God has other plans for him now. No. I have plans. That evening, I didn't sleep. Instead, I began writing. Not a letter, but a story. My truth. I opened my old typewriter, the one Enrique gave me for my 50th birthday. I dusted it off, slid in a clean sheet, and started typing. My name is Maria Estela Navarro. I am a mother of 2 beautiful girls born from a man who wore a collar and preached about righteousness while hiding his own sins beneath the altar. I wrote for hours. And I made copies. I sent one to the local bishop's office, another to a popular spiritual radio program that Leon had been featured on, and one, just one, I sealed in an envelope addressed to his new fiancée. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was cruel. Maybe it was necessary. But the next day, everything changed. A knock came at my door around 8 a.m. I opened it, wearing my floral housecoat and slippers. My hair was still wrapped in rollers. There, on the porch, stood a woman. Young, brown-eyed, barely 30. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She held the envelope I had sent her in one hand. In the other was a picture. A photo of Leon holding Alba as a baby, kissing her forehead. I remember that moment. I had begged him to take just one photo. He gave in. I never thought I'd use it this way. She looked at me. "Is it true?" she asked. I couldn't speak, so I just nodded. She let out a sob that echoed down the street. "I gave up everything for him," she said. "My family, my job." He said we were going to start a new life in Christ. He said he had no secrets. I reached out to touch her arm, but she flinched. "I didn't do this to hurt you," I said quietly. "But you deserve the truth. And so do my girls." She stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked away without another word. I closed the door, my heart heavy. Had I done the right thing? Or had I opened a door that could never be shut? I turned and found Alba standing at the foot of the stairs, holding her stuffed rabbit. She looked at me with those big, searching eyes. "Mom," she said, "was that the lady from the church?" I swallowed hard. Yes. What did she want? I paused. Then I bent down and looked her straight in the eye. "Sweetheart, do you want to know who your father is?" She blinked. Her lips trembled. She nodded slowly. "Come sit with me," I said, taking her small hand. We sat on the old velvet couch in the living room, the one that still smelled faintly of mothballs and lavender. I told her everything. Not the ugly parts, but the true parts. That she was born from love. That her father was someone important, but someone too afraid to be brave. She didn't cry. She just leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I'm glad I have you." But while we sat there in silence, the phone began to ring. I knew who it would be before I picked it up. I let it ring 4 times. Then I answered. "Maria." His voice came through, urgent, angry. "What have you done?" I said nothing. "You're going to ruin everything. Do you know what people are saying?" "I'm just telling the truth," I said. "The truth you were too scared to tell." "You'll regret this," he said, almost spitting. I smiled then. A small, tired smile. "No, Leon. I regret ever trusting a man who said he loved God but couldn't love his own children." He was silent. Then the line went dead. And in that moment, I knew the storm had only just begun, because the story was out, and people were watching. And Leon, he was about to learn what happens when you bury a secret for too long. It doesn't stay buried. It grows. Like a root. And roots, they break concrete. They say truth sets you free. But nobody warns you about the storm that follows. The morning after I exposed everything, I went outside to water the jasmine bushes beneath my kitchen window, my usual routine, but I stopped cold. There were red paint splashes across my front gate. Big, angry letters. Mentirosa. Liar. I stared at it, heart pounding. A chill ran through me, not from the paint, but from the silence of the street. Not a bird, not a breeze. Just stillness, as if the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. I live on Calle de Las Palmas, a a quiet lane in Zaragoza where neighbors know when your curtains change, when your grandson visits, when your mail piles up. The kind of place where secrets walk in high heels and whispers echo louder than bells. And now I had become the gossip. My past, my sin, was now the morning entertainment. I turned the hose off, walked back into the house, locked the door, and leaned against it, eyes closed. The red letters were still burned into my eyelids. Liar. But I hadn't lied. I had simply stopped protecting his. I cleaned the paint later with vinegar and an old rag. My hands ached, but I scrubbed hard, as if erasing the letters would erase the betrayal underneath them. Alba and Carmen watched from inside, their faces pressed to the window, confused but quiet. I hadn't told Carmen yet. She was too soft-hearted, too dreamy. But Alba knew everything. By noon, I got the first call. It was from Dona Pilar, the choir director. "Maria," she said, with a breathy edge. "Did you really?" I didn't answer. She clicked her tongue. "Ay, Dios mío, and to think I let him baptize my grandson." That's how it started. One call became 5. 5 became 12. The story was spreading faster than I expected, and worse, not everyone believed me. Some thought I was senile. Others whispered that I'd invented it to feel important. A few said I was jealous of Leon's upcoming wedding. One even suggested I had faked the whole pregnancy and used another woman's children. As if I had the energy to cook up a lie like that at my age. Even my oldest son, Mateo, called from Madrid. "Madre, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Speaking the truth," I replied. "You're 83. What truth matters now?" That hit me harder than I thought it would. So I hung up. I had expected Leon to crumble, to beg, to confess. But instead, he retaliated. He preached a sermon the next Sunday, his church packed to the doors. I watched it online. He stood there in his golden robe, one hand on the Bible, the other raised like a politician. "There are forces," he said, "trying to destroy the work of God." I laughed. A real, bitter laugh. He didn't mention my name. But he didn't have to. Everyone knew who he was talking about. And yet, he cried on stage. He wept, right there in front of the pulpit, saying he was under spiritual attack. The crowd clapped. Some reached out to touch him. One woman fainted. The video went viral. People were calling him a martyr. And I was suddenly the villain. The old woman who seduced a man of God. I became a cautionary tale. One night, someone threw an egg at my front door. Alba ran out crying, shouting, "Leave my mother alone." I pulled her back in, shut the door, and sank into the couch. I felt so tired. My bones ached. Not from age, but from disappointment. I had expected resistance, yes, but not from everywhere. Even Carmen began asking questions. "Why is everyone saying bad things about us?" she whispered. "Did we do something wrong?" "No," I said, hugging her. "You did nothing wrong. You are the best thing I ever did right." That night, I couldn't sleep. So I reached for my shoebox again. I pulled out the last thing I had saved. A recording. A voice memo. From a rainy night years ago. Leon and I were arguing in his office at the church. I had hidden my phone in my coat pocket. "You can't just erase them, Leon. They're your children." "You think I don't know that?" he whispered harshly. "But if this gets out, I'll lose everything. My ordination. My future." "What about their future?" "They weren't supposed to exist." The silence after that was louder than a scream. I had forgotten I still had that recording. And now, I knew what I had to do. I sent it to a reporter. Not a flashy one. A woman named Elisa Baruco who worked at a local paper. She had once written an exposé on a corrupt bishop. Quiet, careful, brave. I included the voice memo, the hotel receipts, the photos, the ultrasound, everything. 3 days later, the article came out. El Pastor del Silencio, it was titled. The opening paragraph read, "A retired nurse from Zaragoza has come forward with what she claims is the greatest secret buried beneath the marble floors of Iglesia de Santa Maria. A secret involving love, children, and a man who vowed to be married only to God." It exploded. By noon, it had been picked up by national outlets. Radio stations called me. TV shows wanted interviews. I declined all of them, because it wasn't about fame. It was about proof. By evening, Leon released a statement through his church. "I have been falsely accused by a woman who is clearly suffering from confusion and delusion. I pray for her healing. I have never fathered any children." But something had shifted. People weren't buying it anymore. The recording had done something his crocodile tears couldn't undo. That same day, his fiancée vanished from social media. And someone sent me a message. It was from an anonymous number. It read, "You should watch your back, Maria. Some people don't like messy women." I didn't reply, but I printed it out and taped it inside my shoebox. My hands may be wrinkled, but they still remember how to hold evidence. That night, the doorbell rang. It was late, past midnight. I peered through the peephole. It was him, Leon. His collar was gone. He wore a black coat, soaked from the rain. His eyes were wild, like a man unraveling. I opened the door just a crack. "What do you want?" I asked. "I need to talk." "No, please. Maria, please. I'm begging you." I studied him. The man I once loved. The man who told me God had chosen me for him. He looked like a broken statue now. Something chipped and weathered, trying to stand tall but failing. I stepped aside. "5 minutes," I said. "That's all." He stepped into my living room, dripping rainwater on the floor. He opened his mouth to speak, but Alba was suddenly at the top of the stairs. And the moment she saw him, she whispered, "Papa." He froze. His lips parted. Tears welled in his eyes. But then, he said something I'll never forget. "No, I'm not your father." Alba stood there, like a candle that had just been blown out. She turned and ran. I stared at him, too stunned to move. "You just killed her light," I whispered. He didn't reply. I walked to the door, opened it, and pointed outside. "Get out." He stood there, drenched, shaking his head. "You don't understand. They'll take everything. My church, my title, my name." "I already understood that 12 years ago," I said. "Now it's your turn." And then, I shut the door. But just as it clicked, a rock smashed through my front window. Glass flew. Carmen screamed from her bedroom. I hit the floor. The storm, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. I didn't sleep that night. Not with broken glass scattered across the floor like diamonds from a shattered crown. Not with Carmen curled up next to me on the couch, trembling, whispering, "Why do they hate us, Mama?" And not with Leon's final words still echoing in my ears. "They'll take everything from me." But what he didn't understand was, they had already taken everything from me. My peace, my name, my daughter's innocence. I swept up the glass by dawn, piece by piece, barefoot and careful, while the kettle hissed in the background. I didn't bother calling the police. Not in this town. Not when most of them still attended Leon's services and kissed his ring on Sundays. But I did make a quiet call, to a lawyer. A woman I once treated in the hospital years ago. She had been pregnant, terrified, and alone. I had sat with her through the night shift while the nurses gossiped in the hallway. I held her hand through the contractions. She hadn't forgotten. When I told her everything, there was a long pause on the line. Then she said, "Come in tomorrow morning. Don't bring the girls. Bring every single thing you've kept." So I did. The next morning, I wore my navy skirt and a coat that smelled of mothballs. I placed the shoebox carefully in a tote bag lined with cloth. I kissed Alba and Carmen on their foreheads and told them I'd be back before lunch. "Where are you going, Mama?" Carmen asked, her sleepy eyes still swollen from the night before. "I'm going to make sure no one ever throws a stone through our window again," I whispered. The lawyer's office was tucked between a dentist and a bakery, the air heavy with cinnamon and bleach. Her name was Claudia Martin, short, sharp, with dark red lipstick and no tolerance for small talk. She laid out a plan. "Your children have a legal right to know their paternity," she said, flipping through the photos I had kept. "And if he continues to deny them, we file a claim for public defamation and civil damages. If the court orders a paternity test, he's trapped." My heart thudded. "But I don't want his money," I whispered. "I don't want a scandal. I just want him to tell the truth." She looked me straight in the eye. "Sometimes, Maria, the truth needs a scandal." I left her office with a folder in hand and fear in my chest. The air outside felt colder. My cane tapped against the sidewalk like a warning bell. When I got home, Carmen was waiting at the window. Her face was pale. She didn't run to hug me. Instead, she asked, "Why are people at school saying you're a sinner?" I stood still. I looked at my daughter, the one born with tiny lungs and eyes too big for her face, the one who had once wrapped herself in my shawl and said she wanted to grow old with me because she didn't want to leave my side. And now, she looked at me like I was a stranger. I knelt down. "Because I loved someone who was afraid of loving me back," I said gently. "Because I had you, in a way people didn't understand. But Carmen, you are not a sin. You are the reason I survived." Tears welled up in her eyes. She threw her arms around my neck and clung to me so tight I thought I'd break. But I didn't. Not yet. That Sunday, Leon didn't show up to church. Instead, a guest pastor took the stage, clearing his throat nervously. The air in the church was different, thick with rumor. There were whispers. Some parishioners kept glancing at the front pew where Leon usually sat, now empty. And then came the news. The church council had suspended him. The local news didn't say it outright. They used words like temporary leave, investigation, personal matters. But the people knew. The truth had cracked the altar. And the cracks were spreading. Some called it justice. Others called it tragedy. But for me, it was a silence I had waited 12 years to hear. Still, that silence didn't last long. That evening, a letter was slipped under my door. No stamp. No signature. Just 5 words in uneven handwriting. "Your daughters are not safe." I read it once. Twice. My hands shook. I locked every window. I double-bolted the door. I didn't tell Alba or Carmen. Instead, I called Claudia and read the letter out loud. She didn't gasp. She didn't panic. She simply said, "We escalate." Within hours, she filed for a protection order. The next morning, the police finally showed up, not because they cared about the broken window or the threats, but because a court document forced them to. And that was when something strange happened. One of the younger officers, tall, maybe 30, with copper-red hair and freckles, waited until his superior stepped outside, then turned to me and whispered, "I believe you, Señora Navarro. My aunt went through something similar. He ruined her life. Don't stop fighting." I nodded, breathless. It was the first time someone outside my world had looked at me without pity or suspicion. That gave me strength. But later that day, something happened I didn't expect. Carmen went missing. I had just gone to hang the laundry in the backyard. Alba was upstairs, reading. I was only gone 10 minutes. When I came back inside, Carmen wasn't in the living room. Not in her room. Not in the garden. Panic surged through me like ice water. I ran barefoot through the house, shouting her name. Carmen! Carmencita! No answer. I burst into the street, asking neighbors. Nothing. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Then a lifetime. I called the police. The operator took my report, but her voice was calm, robotic, like this was just another missing shoe. I was about to collapse from sobbing when the front door creaked open. Carmen stepped in, covered in dust. Eyes red. Shoes muddy. Where have you been? I cried, dropping to my knees. She looked at me and whispered, I went to see him. My blood ran cold. Who? Pastor Leon. I froze. How did you know where to find him? I heard you talking to the lawyer. You said he was at the church office. I just wanted to ask him something. What did you ask? I choked. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small necklace. The silver cross. The one he gave me. The one I had thrown into the drawer, long forgotten. He said this belonged to someone who lied, she said, her voice hollow. He said you made everything up to ruin him. I sat on the floor, knees stiff, throat dry. And do you believe him? I asked. She didn't answer. She just walked past me and shut herself in her room. That night, Alba sat beside me on the bed and said, I don't think Carmen understands, but I do. I always have. I cried. And for the first time in many years, I let myself cry. Not quietly, not politely, but loudly, like a storm that had waited too long to be heard. Still, I knew. If Leon was bold enough to manipulate Carmen, it was time to go further. Time to bring him into court. Time to end this. Because if he thought I was done, he hadn't seen what a mother does when her child is nearly lost. I sat in the courtroom with my hands folded neatly in my lap, trying not to shake. Not from fear, but from the weight of it all. The marbled walls. The murmurs. The cameras outside flashing through the tall windows. I wore my best navy blue skirt again, the one with the tiny pearl buttons, and a cream shawl over my shoulders. Claudia sat beside me, papers organized, voice sharp. The girls were home with our neighbor, Senora Vega, who had agreed to watch them so they wouldn't be dragged into the circus. And Leon, he stood across from me. No collar this time. No robe. Just a plain black suit and the look of a man who had rehearsed 1,000 excuses and still wasn't ready to face the one woman who had given him something he couldn't erase. 2 daughters. The judge was a thin woman with steel-rimmed glasses and a voice that didn't tremble once. She glanced down at the file in front of her and said, Maria Estela Navarro, aged 83, is requesting paternity confirmation and acknowledgement from the respondent, Senor Leon Velasquez, regarding 2 minor children, aged 12. Leon cleared his throat. Your Honor, these accusations are absurd. This woman has a history of delusions. She has proof, Claudia interrupted sharply. Medical records, photographs, voice recordings, witness statements, and today, we're submitting a formal request for a court-ordered DNA test. Leon's lawyer, a balding man who kept tugging at his tie, stood and mumbled something about privacy and spiritual damage. But the judge wasn't interested in theatrics. I will allow the request. The test will be mandatory. Results to be submitted within 10 business days. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. 10 days. I could wait 10 more days after 12 years. But as I stepped out of that courthouse into the crowd of reporters, one voice stopped me cold. It was a woman's voice, shaky, almost afraid. "I know him too." I turned. She was young, maybe early 30s, long chestnut hair pulled into a messy braid, a baby strapped to her chest, sleeping. She stammered, "I didn't want to come forward, but after your story, I couldn't stay quiet." I stepped closer, heart pounding. "You were with Leon?" She nodded. "For 3 years. He told me the same thing he told you. That I was chosen. That we had to hide. He said God wanted us to protect our love, in silence." Claudia was beside me in a second, notebook already open. "What's your name?" she asked. "Lucia Martinez," the woman whispered. "And this," she touched the baby's cheek, "is his son." Leon had another child. I was stunned. But I shouldn't have been. Predators don't strike once. They rehearse. Lucia agreed to submit a sworn affidavit. And as her story went public, the walls around Leon began to crumble faster than I imagined. More women came forward. Some anonymously. Some bravely. All with similar stories. The town was in uproar. The church issued a formal investigation. Donations stopped coming. And yet, one morning, just 3 days before the DNA results were due, I walked into town to pick up milk and found a flyer glued to the bakery window. It had my photo. And the words, "She destroyed our pastor. Shame." I ripped it down, my fingers trembling. But the damage was done. Some still wanted to believe he was innocent, because it was easier than accepting their shepherd had been a wolf. That night, I didn't sleep again. Carmen was quiet, distant. Alba kept asking me if we'd have to move. And me. I just kept staring at the shoebox, at the letter Leon had once written, declaring love, regret, and fear. And now I realized it was never about love. It was always about control. But I had something else now. Strength. The kind that only comes when you've lost your reputation, your peace, your dignity, and decided to reclaim it anyway. On the day of the DNA results submission, Leon didn't show up in court. His lawyer did. Flustered. Alone. He handed over an envelope. The judge opened it slowly, adjusted her glasses, and read the single page aloud. Paternity match. 99.999% probability. The respondent, Leon Velasquez, is the biological father of both minor children, Alba and Carmen Navarro. The courtroom went dead silent. I didn't cry. I just exhaled, long and deep. 12 years. 12 years of hiding, of lying, of raising questions in my daughter's eyes and shame in my chest. And now the truth was on paper. Undeniable. The judge looked up. "Do you wish to add anything to the record, Señora Navarro?" I stood, legs stiff, knees cracking with age. But my voice, steady. "Yes, Your Honor. I just want it known that this wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting my children and giving them the name they were born with." As I walked out of that courtroom, the town didn't cheer. There were no flowers, no applause. But Claudia squeezed my hand, and Alba ran into my arms. That was enough. Or so I thought. 2 days later, during Sunday Mass, Leon did the unthinkable. He showed up. He pushed past the interim priest and climbed onto the altar. His eyes were red, beard untrimmed, hands shaking. He grabbed the microphone. "I need to speak," he said. Gasps filled the room. People turned in their pews. I wasn't there, but it was streamed online, and every word he spoke still echoes in my head. "I have sinned against this congregation, against the women who trusted me, against the children I denied. I lied to you, For years I lied. Murmurs rippled. I was selfish. I used my position to manipulate, to hide, to control. And I hurt good people in the name of God. I cannot ask for forgiveness. I can only confess. He paused, then added something no one expected. There are more. Some you don't know. Some who never spoke. And I will tell you everything. He dropped the microphone and walked away. The next day, he checked into a private monastery for deep spiritual rehabilitation. I didn't send flowers. I didn't call. But that night, as I tucked Alba and Carmen into bed, Carmen reached up and whispered, "Mama, I'm glad you didn't stop." I kissed her forehead. Then I went into my room, opened the window, and for the first time in years, I slept. But the story wasn't over, because 3 days later, I found a white envelope in my mailbox. No return address, just one word on the back. Grandmother. Inside, a photograph of a girl, dark-haired, brown eyes, and a note. My name is Esperanza. I'm 19, and I think I'm your granddaughter. The envelope sat on my kitchen table all night. I didn't touch it after the first read. Didn't eat. Didn't sleep. Just stared at the photo of the girl, Esperanza, with her big brown eyes, a dimple on her left cheek, and a resemblance so haunting it made my chest ache. There was something about her gaze. It wasn't pleading. It wasn't shy. It was knowing, like she had spent her entire life walking in the shadows of someone else's sin, and had finally decided to step into the light. The note was brief. My name is Esperanza. I'm 19. I grew up in Leon's old neighborhood in Valencia. My mother told me stories, but she's gone now. I've seen your name in the papers. I think I'm your granddaughter. I'd like to meet you. I read it again and again, but every time I tried to picture this girl walking through my door, something inside me pulled back, because I had spent 12 years just fighting for 2 girls, 2 names, 2 truths. And now there was another life hidden, another child denied, another piece of Leon's legacy of lies. I finally picked up the phone and called Claudia. I got a letter, I told her, my voice low. Another threat? No. A girl. She says Leon is her father, which would make her my granddaughter. Silence on the line. Then, you want me to check her out? I hesitated. Yes, because I had been burned before. And not just by Leon. When a woman becomes visible at my age, when she dares to speak up after decades of being quiet, people start circling. For attention. For money. For manipulation. Even family can turn on you, if they think you're holding something they can use. Claudia promised to look into it discreetly. I hung up, then turned to find Alba standing in the doorway, arms crossed. You're hiding something, she said. I raised a brow. I'm 83, not dead. I'm allowed to have secrets. Alba didn't laugh. She walked to the table, picked up the envelope, and looked at the photo. She looks like Carmen, she whispered. I said nothing. Then she added something that shook me. So, does that make us replaceable? I blinked. What? Just, there's more of us out there, right? How many more? Her voice cracked. If he lied about her, too, maybe we're not special. Maybe we're just accidents. I stood up and grabbed her hand. No, I said firmly. You're not an accident. You were born from something real, even if it was hidden. And I didn't fight for the truth to find more lies. I fought because you deserve to be seen. She nodded, but I could still see the doubt swimming in her eyes. That night, Claudia called back. She's real, she said. Esperanza. Yes. Her mother was Isabel Calderon, a former volunteer at Leon's first parish when he was in his 20s. There was no marriage, no acknowledgement, but locals remembered him visiting the house during late hours. He left shortly after her birth. I sat down. And the mother? Died of cancer last year. Esperanza was listed as the only beneficiary. No criminal record. Studying social work. Top of her class. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for my tea. And she wants to meet me? Yes. Then let's meet. We agreed on a public cafe near the city gardens. Neutral ground. Midday. I wore my lavender dress and Alba insisted on curling my hair the old way, with paper and pins, like I used to do in the 60s. When Esperanza walked in, I felt my breath catch. She wore jeans and a soft gray sweater. No makeup. A single braid down her back. She was taller than Alba. Slightly darker skin. But her smile? I had seen it before. Dozens of times. In the mirror. On Carmen. In old photos of Leon when he was younger and hadn't yet learned to lie with his mouth while praying with his hands. Señora Navarro? She asked. I stood. Please. Just Maria. She sat across from me, clutching a leather journal. I didn't come for money, she said, voice quiet. I don't want to be in the papers. I just wanted to know if there was someone out there who knew the truth. I nodded. I know the truth. But it's ugly. She opened the journal. Inside were photos, letters, a baby bracelet with her name. My mother kept everything, she said. Even after he disappeared. She said he convinced her to keep quiet, that his career was just starting, that he'd come back for us. Her eyes glistened. He never did. I reached across the table and took her hand. I'm sorry, I whispered, for what he took from you. I just want to know if I belong somewhere, she said. I smiled. You do now. Bringing Esperanza home was not easy. Carmen was confused. Alba was protective. And I was overwhelmed. But little by little, she blended in. She told jokes at dinner, helped Carmen with homework, walked with Alba to the fruit market. It was as if she'd always been there. Until the threats returned. A note slipped under the back door. She's not part of this. Stop digging. Claudia took it to the authorities. They promised an investigation. I didn't hold my breath. But then something unexpected happened. A new name entered the picture. A priest. Father Julian Ortega, retired, living near Bilbao. He had seen Leon's rise from the very beginning. And he had receipts. Literally. Old letters. Private emails. Even journals Leon had kept when he was in seminary training, where he wrote about temptations, secret affections, and the tests God sent him in the form of vulnerable women. Father Julian reached out to Claudia, offering full cooperation. And one of those journal entries mentioned me by name. Maria Navarro. Widow. Eyes full of storm. I fear her gentleness will unravel me. I see God in her, and also the fire I was warned about. If I fall, it will be her fault. That entry was dated 3 weeks before he kissed me for the first time. And 3 months before I conceived the twins. I stared at the copy in my hands, nauseous. I had blamed myself for so long. But the truth? He had written my downfall before I even said yes. This wasn't a love story. It was a script he had used over and over again. Esperanza. Lucia. Isabel. Me. Maybe more. So many more. The next Sunday, I stood outside his former church, flyer in hand. It read, How many more lives has he touched? If you have a story, we will listen. Maria Navarro. And beneath it, my phone number. Esperanza stood beside me. And one by one, women came. Not all were victims. Some were witnesses. Some were children. And one carried a photo of Leon, holding her newborn baby. He told me he couldn't be a father again, she said, because he'd already messed up once with some older woman in Zaragoza. I didn't say a word, just wrapped my arms around her, because I knew what it meant to carry the weight of someone else's denial. But as the women gathered, as the crowd grew, as Leon's legacy began to fall apart piece by piece, a new envelope arrived at my home. No stamp, no handwriting, just a single typed message inside. You think this is over, but you don't know what I buried. And on the back, a funeral program, with Enrique Navarro's name, my husband, dead 20 years. And suddenly, it all made sense, because now, it wasn't just about Leon's lies. It was about my late husband, and what Leon had hidden all along. I must have stared at the funeral program for a full minute before I moved. It was old, faded edges, the kind that curl from years of hiding. The photo on the front was of Enrique. My Enrique. My husband of 35 years. He wore his favorite wool coat, the one we bought together in Pamplona the winter after Mateo was born. But on the back, scrawled in tight, slanted type, was the message that stopped my breath cold. You think this is over, but you don't know what I buried. I dropped the paper. For a moment, the room spun. Because the funeral, his death, had never seemed suspicious to me. He died in his sleep. Peacefully, they said. A sudden heart failure. The doctor called it natural, and I, being a nurse, accepted it. I even told the boys. He didn't suffer. But now, after everything I had uncovered about Leon, a new question took root. What if Enrique didn't die naturally? I sat down hard, clutching the arms of the chair. My hands were ice. My stomach twisted with something between fear and shame, because Leon had entered my life barely 2 years after Enrique's death. He was always too familiar, too confident when speaking of Enrique. Once, I had brushed it off as a pastor's natural curiosity, his need to connect with a grieving widow. But now I wondered if it had been something else entirely. I picked up the phone and called Claudia. My voice barely rose above a whisper. I think I made a mistake, I said. What happened? I think Leon knew my husband before I did. She didn't question it. She just asked, do you have access to your husband's autopsy report? No, I said. They never performed one. He was 68. They said it was routine. Then we need to look deeper. Give me 24 hours. She hung up. I sat in silence, feeling the weight of everything. My daughters, the mounting truth, and now the terrifying possibility that Leon had been circling my family long before I realized. Later that day, Claudia called back. I pulled the funeral home records, she said, and I had a contact check your husband's old case file from the municipal health office. I waited. There's something odd. The attending physician who signed Enrique's death certificate was Leon Velasquez. My breath caught. That's impossible, I said. Leon wasn't even a doctor. No, he wasn't, but he worked as a medical assistant for a short time, during his seminary training, before he was ordained. But Enrique died at home, I whispered. Yes, and Leon was part of the volunteer emergency response team at the time. It's in the records. I covered my mouth. The memory came rushing back. That night, the sirens, The strange man who knocked at my door, dressed in white. He came in quickly, checked Enrique, and declared him gone. I never saw his face clearly. I was in shock. But I remembered his voice. Low, gentle, certain. And now I knew why it sounded so familiar when Leon first spoke at the pulpit years later. He had been there. Not just in my church, but in my home. The night my husband died. I didn't tell the girls. Not yet. How do you tell children their father may have been denied the life they were born from? Instead, I lit a candle at Enrique's photo on the mantel and sat alone for hours. Had Leon done something to him? Or was it just coincidence? And why wait 20 years to drop that program in my mailbox? Was it guilt? Or a threat? I had no answers. But I knew someone who might. Esperanza. When she arrived the next morning, I didn't sugarcoat it. I showed her the funeral program, told her everything. Her face went pale. Then she said something I hadn't expected. My mother told me once, she used to see Leon meeting an older man in secret, at a cafe near Valencia. He said it was his spiritual mentor. But when she pressed, he got angry. My blood ran cold. Did she ever say who the man was? No. Just that he had gray hair, a limp, and looked tired. But kind. Enrique had a limp from a factory accident in his 40s. Kind eyes. Gray hair. It was him. Can you take me to that cafe? I asked. She nodded. The next morning, I boarded a train to Valencia with Esperanza. We sat side by side in silence. As the city came into view, my nerves tangled into knots. The cafe was still there, Café del Alba, a small corner shop with green shutters and flower pots hanging from the balcony above. The waitress was new. But the owner, an older woman named Mariela, remembered Enrique. Sí, claro, she said. He used to meet that church boy. Always wore black. Looked angry all the time. Did they argue? I asked. She nodded. Sometimes. But mostly your husband just listened. Wrote things in a small red notebook. My head jerked up. What notebook? He left it once. I kept it in the back for months, but no one ever claimed it. I gave it to the church office eventually, to that same priest. Leon. Of course. He had taken Enrique's notebook. That night, I sat in my hotel room and stared at the ceiling. There was only one way to get that notebook. And it wasn't going to be easy, because the church had locked Leon's personal records away after the scandal broke. Claudia tried. But without a court order, we couldn't touch anything. So I did what any mother who had faced death threats, shame, and betrayal would do. I went myself. The church archives were held at a private seminary outside Zaragoza. Stone walls. A red gate. Tall, solemn trees lined the property like guards. I dressed plainly, gray shawl, worn shoes, no makeup. Just another forgotten widow hoping to pray in peace. They let me in. I wondered. I waited. And when the young archivist stepped out to take a call, I slipped into the back room. Rows of boxes. Years of secrets. I scanned the shelves, trembling. Then I saw it. A worn red notebook with EN written in the corner. Enrique Navarro. I stuffed it into my bag. And left. Back home, I locked my door and pulled the curtains before opening it. Inside were pages of notes. Meetings with Leon. Questions about theology. But then, a single page tore the breath from my lungs. He asked me if I believed God allowed new love after death. Said he was counseling a widow. He kept describing her in detail. Blonde hair. Wounded eyes. He called her Estrella. Said she was special. Said she made him feel chosen. I told him to be careful, to respect grief. He didn't like that. Today, he asked me about sleeping pills. Wanted to know how many could stop a heart without leaving a mark. My knees buckled. Because Estrella was what Leon used to call me. A play on my name, Estella. I covered my mouth and sobbed. He had planned this. He had courted me. But before that, he had sought out Enrique, learned everything about me, studied my grief. And maybe he hadn't just waited for Enrique to die. Maybe he helped. I sat there for hours. And then the phone rang. It was the police. There's been an arrest, the officer said. We believe it's connected to the threats against your family. Who? I whispered. A pause. Then, a church elder, one of Leon's closest allies. He tried to destroy evidence. My heart dropped, because that meant Leon's house of secrets wasn't just built by him. It was protected. But now the cracks were visible. And what was buried was coming to the surface. The sun was sinking low when the police car pulled up in front of my house. I was sitting on the porch with Alba and Carmen, watching the orange sky bleed into purple. The officer stepped out, his face grim. We arrested him, he said, nodding toward the car. Who? I asked, heart pounding. Antonio Lopez, church elder, Leon's closest confidant. We found him trying to destroy files linked to Enrique's case. I gasped. Claudia had warned me this would get messy. Is Leon involved? I whispered. The officer hesitated. We believe so. Evidence suggests a coordinated effort to cover up the truth about Enrique's death and other women connected to Leon. I felt cold. The past wasn't just unraveling. It was exploding. That night, the news spread like wildfire. Local papers ran headlines. Church scandal rocks Zaragoza. Pastor's allies arrested. The town was divided. Some rallied behind Leon, calling it a witch hunt. Others whispered prayers for the victims. I sat with Esperanza, Alba, and Carmen, the weight of it all pressing down. Then, a message appeared on my phone. Meet me at the old chapel. Midnight. Alone. No signature. No explanation. Just a summons. I knew who it was. Leon. Midnight. The chapel was deserted. Moonlight spilled through broken stained glass, casting colors on dusty pews. I stepped inside, heart racing. Maria, a voice whispered. He emerged from the shadows, eyes wild but sincere. I wanted to tell you the truth, he said. I scoffed. Too late. He sighed. There's more than you know. Enrique wasn't my only secret. I stared. My mentor, Father Julian, he warned me about my darkness. He said the past could destroy me. He was right. Leon fell to his knees. I'm sorry. For everything. Suddenly, footsteps echoed. Police burst in, led by Claudia. You're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction, and manslaughter investigation. Leon looked at me. Tell them the truth. I nodded. As they cuffed him, I whispered, It's time. The next weeks were a whirlwind. Church records were seized. Hidden journals revealed. Testimonies poured in. And the community watched as Leon's empire crumbled. But the hardest battle was at home. Mateo and the other sons confronted me. How could you drag our family through this? But Alba stood tall. We deserve to know the truth. And so do the others. The town's whispers became shouts. And on the day Leon's trial began, the courthouse was packed. The courtroom doors opened, and Leon appeared, broken, stripped of titles, facing his past. He turned to me. For what it's worth, I'm sorry, he said. I nodded. We all have our cross to bear. As the trial unfolded, secrets spilled. Enrique's death was ruled suspicious. Leon was charged. And the women he hurt found justice. But amid the victory, a final letter arrived at my door. No return address. Inside, a single sentence. This is only the beginning. I looked at Alba and Carmen. We're ready. Because some storms don't pass. They change everything. The days after Leon's arrest felt surreal. The weight of years pressing down on me, yet a strange lightness floated through the house. The truth had shattered the silence that had held my family hostage for so long. But peace was still a distant dream. The town's gossip didn't stop. It intensified. Friends turned cold. Neighbors whispered behind curtains. Some called me a hero, others, a harlot. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch, a letter arrived. No name, no address, just a thin envelope. Inside was a key and a note. The truth lies where it began. I knew instantly. The old family estate, the place where Enrique and I had built our life before the grief and secrets tore us apart. With Alba and Carmen, I journeyed there, the past and present swirling with every step. Inside the dusty study, beneath a loose floorboard, we found an old diary. Enrique's handwriting, faded but steady. Pages revealed his suspicions about Leon before his death. Threats, veiled warnings, pleas for help that went unanswered. It was proof, not just of Leon's guilt, but of my husband's bravery against a darkness that had consumed more than just our family. Tears fell as I clutched the diary, realizing my fight wasn't only for my daughters, it was for Enrique's memory, for justice long overdue. But even then, a shadow loomed. The diary ended with a chilling last line. If I perish, let my truth awaken the fallen. Outside, the wind whispered. The storm was far from over. Back in Zaragoza, the trial reached its climax. Leon sat silent, eyes hollow, as testimonies unfolded like a dark tapestry. Women spoke, some crying, some fierce, each piece stitching the story of deception, betrayal, and broken lives. Esperanza's voice rang clear, steady. I'm not just his daughter. I'm a survivor. The courtroom held its breath. Then came the final testimony, the diary. Claudia presented Enrique's words with gravity. Leon's defense crumbled under the weight of truth. When the verdict came, silence fell. Guilty. For obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and involvement in Enrique's suspicious death. Sentenced to prison for 20 years. Outside, the crowd erupted, some in relief, others in disbelief. I held Alba and Carmen close. We did it, I whispered. But my heart was heavy, because some wounds run too deep for justice to heal. That night, I sat alone and found a letter tucked beneath my door. From Leon. A confession, not for the court, but for me. He spoke of remorse, of sins he could never undo, and a hope that I might one day forgive him. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully. Forgiveness was not mine to give. Not yet. Months passed. The house filled with laughter again. Esperanza became family. We planted roses in the garden, red, white, and gold, symbols of pain, purity, and hope. Alba and Carmen grew stronger, their faces bright with newfound pride. One morning, as sunlight streamed through lace curtains, I sat with my daughters, holding their hands. Your story is ours, I said softly. No shame, no silence, just truth. And outside, church bells rang, not in Leon's name, but in honor of healing. My phone buzzed. A message from Esperanza. Thank you for the fight, for the love, for the truth. We are finally free. I smiled. The storm had changed us. It had broken us. But from the broken pieces, we built something new. A family bound not by lies, but by unshakable love. And as I looked at my daughters, blonde curls and brown eyes intertwined, I knew this was only the beginning of our story. Our story of survival. Our story of truth. Our story of hope.